Did you validate your market? Did you go into a market that didn't have a ton of VC cash? Okay, is your product good? Did you listen to your users? And like, they're like, no. Did you do any marketing? No, I thought people would come. Yeah, and you do see a lot of that.
I think that there's a place for building people up. And of course, in the startup industry, in Silicon Valley, there's people helping people. But I think there's this little kernel where sometimes the indie makers forget this is business.
There is like a recipe for success. There is, here are the steps you need to take to do it. And there are often people that just don't do it. They just ignore the advice. I've not managed to figure it out myself, but I'm aware of that, and I'm not moaning on Twitter about it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Remotely Serious. I'm going to jump right into this one. I am talking to someone I've wanted to talk to for a while, James McKinven. I've heard you because we both work with JR at Lemon Squeezy as the co-host and I assume producer to an extent of the Make Lemonade podcast, but you also produce the Uncensored CMO podcast. And of course, you're the founder of Pod Panda and Whitstable Craft Company. That's a lot of different things, and that's probably representative of the typical portfolio of an indie maker. And so I kind of jumped on asking you to come on the podcast to talk about indie makers and of course yourself. But we'll probably touch on a few different things, including podcasting. So first of all, welcome, James, and I'm excited to jump in.
Thanks, Curtis. I love being on podcasts, so I'm delighted you've asked me.
How often do you get interviewed? Let's call this a conversation, not an interview, but how often do you sit in the chair of someone maybe leading a bit and asking you questions versus interviewing or, leading the conversation with others?
Rarely ever. And I wish I got invited on more podcasts. I've had the co-hosted ones, but even the co-hosted ones I kind of lead because when you have two British drivers talking about things, I fall into my interview mode. And I wish that when guests went on podcasts that they would ask more questions, because a conversational format always just feels a little bit nicer rather than it just being question answer. So I rarely ever have guests on any of my shows that ask questions back. When they do, it's great. So I have to say, I'm sorry if I do end up starting asking you questions.
Oh, please do.
But it's kind of nice not having to prep and lead the conversation.
Yeah, more podcasters should probably go to those improv comedy classes where you learn to nicely interrupt instead of letting people trade monologues for 8 minutes and you create a flow. But
have you done improv comedy?
No, I haven't. But I lived in New York for a long time, and that's one of my favorite things to do on the weekend after a long week of a difficult startup journey. Going to the East Village or some other place and watching improv comedy. One of my favorite things to do in the evening in New York.
Do you like New York City?
Yes, I love it. It's one of my favorite places in the world. It holds a special place in my heart, and I think it's completely unique. Right now, it's more expensive than I was there in the late 2010s, and it was expensive then, and it's crazily expensive now. So I don't want to minimize the sort of downside and actual like value for New York. And if you're spending $1,300 a night in a hotel or your rent is $10,000 a month, I definitely would say that's not worth it. Go to Bali, go to Lisbon, and live a different life. But if you find yourself fortunate enough to make it work there, I like it a lot.
Because I've managed to be lucky enough to go to New York like 10, 15 times over the last couple of years.
Oh, wow.
And this year I've been 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
It's often for podcast recordings. I'm lucky I get all expenses paid when I go. And I just don't love it. I really liked it at the start.
Yeah.
London is where I didn't grow up there, but I'm close enough to London. I lived in London for a long time. As a city, prime city, my favorite in the world. I thought New York would be similar, just a bit busier. But it's like, it's busier, but it's smellier. And like, shit doesn't work quite as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish it did. So I don't know. I'm warm into it a little bit more.
So is it mostly the convenience? It's not as well run as London, and that's your main gripe, and it's dirtier and smellier. Are those the two main
It's dirtier and smellier.
Yeah.
There's a lot more unhinged people on the streets.
Yeah.
And there's just less of that. So like, sometimes I will walk around New York and I just feel a little unsafe.
Yeah.
And I'm a mid-20s guy who's fit and healthy. I shouldn't feel like uneasy walking around a place because if you glance at someone the wrong way, they're gonna like start shouting at you. And I've had that like a few times in New York.
Hmm.
And like on the metro, I've had a few of those just weird situations that you just don't get in London.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because here in British Columbia and Western Canada, maybe globally not known for, let's say, homeless or unhoused or mental health problems. Maybe, but that is changing a little bit because anybody that's here knows that in Vancouver, especially and in Victoria, where I am, there are neighborhoods that are full of unhinged people for whatever
Hmm.
reason in life got them there. And so I don't want to say that's normalized, but like where I live here, there's sort of these neighborhoods that are contained to a certain area, but can be some of the worst in Canada. So maybe that trained me for being in New York to just handle it and handle it. But I get what you're saying. You're not wrong. There's garbage bags on the streets, and London is cleaner and not as smelly. Um,
It
before
smells of weed there. Like, why does it smell of weed so
in
bad?
New York,
Yeah.
well, it didn't. I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but I think it's the legalization. They
Yeah.
that's a huge turning point when you legalize
I
it.
know, but it just like everywhere it smells like weed.
Yeah,
I'm like, guys, this is as a Brit, I do not enjoy it.
yeah.
I Weed is great. Weed is fine. Some people enjoy it. Some people don't. But like the smell of it everywhere just isn't quite as pleasant.
Yeah, I don't want to throw London on their bus, but I actually feel the opposite. So I'm going to not say London. I'll say something like France, where I actually
Yeah.
feel the same way, but about cigarette smoke. Where when I go to somewhere in France or Italy, it's like, oh, guys, you shouldn't smoke cigarettes. Like, and the smell of cigarettes is disgusting, and marijuana smoke doesn't bother me at all. It's like, oh, it's a nice, it's like an incense, a little fragrance as you walk down the street. But
Interesting.
cigarette smoke, it's like you guys need to you guys are right about a lot of things about sort of like dolce far niente and the joy of a siesta in France and Italy and Spain, but you should all stop smoking cigarettes. There's nothing good that comes out of it.
Would you
You
say London smells like that as well at times?
a bit more, just not quite the continental level of smoking, but just a little bit more. I would say
Yeah.
smoking has departed from North America in a way since 20 years ago. It's almost not done anywhere outdoors. Of course it happens. Of course people are doing it outside the bar or the pub late at night at some point. But it used to be like when I was a kid, and I'm not that old, when I was a kid, there would be restaurants with smoke with cigarettes in them, and you would, go to someone's house that smells like smoke indoors. And almost all that's gone, and the social smoking is almost gone. Of course, replaced to some extent by the vapes.
That's interesting because same here. Like my parents smoked, they've since stopped, but like none of my friends on a day-to-day basis smoke cigarettes. But social smoking, rife.
Hmm.
Absolutely rife. Like I
After
go
a
to the
few
pub with my
pints, right?
friends.
The after a few
After a few
pints, yeah.
pints, they're smoking. I have never smoked a cigarette in my life. But I'm like, how do all of you guys just turn into smokers when you drink and
Yeah.
never need it when we're out doing anything else? So yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say we were talking about this just before we turned the mics on, but you messaged me right before we started and said, "Hey, do you have any notes for the podcast?" And I wanted to start there on that note. You are the host of Indie Bites, and up until recently, the co-host of this Indie Life. And so I was just curious, maybe right off the bat, sorry, Indie Bites. That's a short podcast. That's usually about 15 minutes, and this Indie Life was more of a conversation with your co-host. How did you prepare, or do you prepare for those two podcasts? Is it different for a short podcast versus two guys gabbing, two guys hanging out and chatting? How do you prepare?
So Indie Bites is quite well prepared. It's as well prepared as any podcast can be and should be, in the sense that if I'm having a guest on, I want to make sure that I know their entire story because I want to be able to, because I only have a short amount of time to tell that story, I need to know the points I want to keep and remove. And so knowing the story beforehand, I feel I owe it to the guest. So I am pretty meticulously planning every episode.
Hmm.
And what I used to do is I used to put down my notes, put down the sections that I wanted to talk about in someone's story, and then I put like a little timestamp behind it. I want to talk about this stuff for 3 minutes, then I'd try and stick to that. And if I went over in that recording, I would then edit it down to try and hit that sort of 3 minutes. And that's worked well. I think every pod should have some level of preparation. The co hosted ones or a news format type show, it's a lot easier. So with Dagobert, with This Indie Life, that was hella easy to prepare for. We spent 5-10 minutes. I'd go through my Twitter, see what I tweeted about, write some notes on what I'd done this week. Bam, there's your talking points. But it will be very hard to go into that with nothing, having like not thought about what I'd done this week. So you need those points. And if you're doing a news show, it will be nice to have, here are our 3 articles. Each person has read that article, and then you can talk about it. But prep for an interview show, I feel it needs to be really prepped. Although, on occasion, Curtis, if a guest hasn't been on many shows before,
Hmm.
I it's harder to prep because you can't listen to a recording they've done. Maybe they don't tweet as much. Maybe they don't write many blog posts. It's kind of hard to piece together. But in that sense, you can make a show where you are the person telling their story almost for the first time. So I will have a longer slot with that person and I'll just ask them the questions that I'm curious about. So where did you start? Where did you go from this point? Do you have any inflection points you can remember? And so I will just use my curiosity rather than it being really prepared.
Which do you prefer, or which is more fun, the highly professionalized approach to extracting a gem of a 15-minute interview out of a business person or a guest that you have, or hanging out with Dago for 45 minutes? And I guess you stopped doing that recently, so maybe and you
Yeah.
said that actually got difficult. So maybe we can get into that, whatever you want to get into. But you've continued with Indie Bites, so I'm just curious which one you prefer or which is more fun.
That's a totally loaded question, Curtis. What do you think? What do you think of pod's more fun? The co-hosted one is.
Y-
Indie Bites is hard,
yeah.
but because I've been doing it for over 100 episodes and I've got a decent listenership of it, it does feel like more of a job. There
Hmm.
is an expectation that I produce a good episode, and you have another party that you probably haven't met before,
Yeah.
and so the expectation is higher, and I know I've got to condense it down, so it does feel like a job. Do I still really enjoy speaking to people and interviewing them and finding out about other indie makers? Absolutely. But is loading up a pod and having a little chit chat with a friend when we've just had a few bullet points going to be more fun? Yes. The trouble with it is, now I have had 2 co-hosted shows. I've not actually spoken about why this indie life stopped or why I stopped with Dagobert. Second one I stopped. First one was called No More Mondays with Dan Rowden, founder of Illo, and a few other things, popular on Twitter. That one stopped because I think Dan might have been getting a little bit stressed out with doing it. He was a little bit introverted, so doing a podcast didn't come as naturally to him as it did me. And when I said, Dan, can I carry on the show? He was like, with another co-host, he was like, no, it was my idea. So had to scrap that. And then I went through the process of finding someone else because I really like this co-hosted format. I can go 2
Yeah.
different directions here, Curtis. I can tell you why I like the co-hosted format and then tell you what happened with
Well,
this indie life, or
well,
we
one of the
can talk about
public
that after.
tweets about it, this indie life, was that it's like two people monologuing that aren't actually listening to each other. So I'm
Yeah,
interested to
Dagobah
hear
said
if
that.
there's more to the story there.
Nah, dude.
But
I
let's start with let's go there. Let's go there. You
yeah.
just changed my mind.
I
Tell me
uh,
more.
I disagree that it was fully like that. It did feel like that at times with Dagobert because we weren't necessarily working on things that were complementary. He was doing a logo design service, I was doing podcasting. And what I found with the pod with Dan, we were genuinely interested in what each other were doing.
Hmm.
And it's so hard to find a co-host that
What
is
was
like
can we just set up what was the theme with Dan that you ostensibly would what was your North Star there for what you actually talk about? And then was it the same with Dago? Was it the same kind of podcast? Can you just sort of
it was
set up the two podcasts?
yeah, it was almost identical.
Hmm.
It was um I like short podcasts, so I set it to a 25-minute limit. And uh one person would talk about what they're working on, 12 and a half minutes. Other person would talk about what they're working on, 12 and a half minutes.
Hmm.
There are a lot of these bootstrap shows
Hmm.
where
I listened to that
two
one. Yeah, with Dan.
bootstrappers,
Yeah.
they're they're really enjoyable shows,
Hmm.
and they're sometimes more enjoyable than the interview shows, because interview shows are sometimes quite intense. You're learning about someone's journey. There's a lot of takeaways from it, whereas these co-hosted shows can often feel like you are listening to a conversation with a couple of mates, and that's quite entertaining for people. As long as you pack it with interesting insights and stories, then that is. And I also feel you should put a decent amount of editing to it.
Hmm.
Dan and I would speak for 45, 50 minutes. I would always cut it down to the 25 best minutes. I think listeners, I owe it to listeners for that. So, what was it? It was format, right? It was,
Well, and then was it the
what
same
was North
format
Star?
with Dago? Was it the
Yeah, yeah.
same format with This Indie Life?
Exactly the same format
Yeah.
with Dago. Now, I was saying with Dan, it was quite easy because um, Dan was doing interesting SaaS stuff, and I was sort of trying to find my way to making money, getting out of debt. But Dago and I were just at different stages.
Hmm.
And he was into doing the Twitter stuff, and I was into figuring out how I was going to make money through podcasting.
How long did
Then
how long did This Indie Life last with you two as the co-host? How long was that from start to recently?
it was about a year, I
About a
think.
year.
And I love Dago.
Hmm.
Dago is such a good guy. He's a genuine friend, and he was genuinely interested in my situation and what I was going through. I think we did it for a year. And when I started that pod, I was trying to figure out where I was going to go with work, with life. And eventually I got this gig with Uncensored CMO. I got this gig with Lemon Squeezy, and a lot of my financial struggles, which is kind of why I was trying to be an indie hacker in the first place,
Hmm.
had gone. And I ended up just kind of having a job and not hating it.
Hmm.
Having a job that I enjoyed, that had all the flexibility that I wanted, and there was no pressure.
Yeah.
So as Dago went through the challenges in his personal life and wanted to talk about more of that, I had less indie updates
Hmm.
to talk about. I wasn't really working on projects. I was just doing the same thing every week. It was right.
Yeah.
I've got my deadlines for my podcast to do, get them out. None. I had less interesting stuff to say. So what it would have turned into is me having not much to say and just asking Dago about the stuff that he was going on. And he wasn't really working on anything at the time. He was like working on personal shit, getting through life and trying to
Yeah.
figure out what happens after his divorce. He's then gone on and switched it to an interview show, and I don't feel I need an interview show because I've already got one. So
Right.
props to him, like massive props to him. I said to Dago, I'm like, mate, I'm not as into doing uh, indie stuff at the moment. I don't think my updates will be very interesting. But if you want to carry on solo, I feel you've got a lot to say, or the interviews that you've been talking about, go ahead with that. So
Yeah.
we just sort of we're at different points in what we wanted from the pod.
One observation from anyone who listened to This Indie Life was that, Dago would get into, and I guess still does, very personal things, probably beyond almost anyone, about the very specific flavor of fight that he had with his wife, or now ex-wife, and how he
Yeah.
felt and all that kind of thing. What was it like co-hosting across from that? And that genre is obviously, it's kind of become his bread and butter. He's still talking about startup burnout, startup trauma, startup PTSD, startup destruction. Um, what's it like kind of co-hosting across from that genre, which Dago makes his bread and butter, but is also popular on Twitter? Like, hey guys, not everyone's a 10K MRR. Today I cried and I went for a bike ride and I didn't do any work. That's my update. And I think that's a certain genre. What do you feel about that genre of indie maker content?
I think authenticity and honesty is needed.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of people sharing a lot of positive stuff, and sometimes you need to share the bad things. I don't enjoy consuming that myself all the time. I
Hmm.
like hearing about it, and I like hearing people overcome it. I like a story arc,
Yeah.
challenge, overcome. I want more lighthearted stuff.
Hmm.
If I've got time that I'm spending listening to a podcast, I kind of want to be entertained. And so, two people doing this great at the moment, Ian Landsman and Aaron Francis. Aaron talks about some of on the Mostly Technical pod, by the way. Aaron talks about his challenges, but they also have like a really good laugh about stuff.
Hmm.
And so they were talking about the socks they had, and that they like standardizing their socks. I was listening to that, laughing away. I was like, that's really entertaining. Um,
Yeah.
and I just I struggle to listen to stuff being so deep and so intense all of the time. I'm moving away from listening to a bunch of business stuff. I want to be entertained. I want it to be fun. And yes, you be honest, but like some things just hold back on a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
It's just my opinion.
On a similar note, I actually think that just a little bit of my background, I'll just condense it really quickly, but I spent 4.5 years on the raising millions of dollars, running a company with 30 or 40 people, being the CEO, and selling it in 2020. It was in digital healthcare. It was a digital diabetes prevention program. It took me to New York. It took me around the world. It took me through some dark times, just like a lot of indie
Mm,
makers, some very dark times, and some high highs when we hit certain successes. And ultimately, when we sold a few weeks before COVID started, that was probably in the long run a high high. So I didn't live the 2010s, let's say, in this indie maker world. It's kind of something like after I sold the company, I was solo on my own,
yeah.
having a quarter life or third life retirement for 6 months after leaving the acquirer. I kind of just started listening to podcasts and reading blogs and kind of getting into, oh, who are these people that are kind of just running these one person companies? This is an interesting different way to do things. And one thing that I observed is that I think sometimes the indie maker culture, I feel like I'm an insider now. I worked with Lemon Squeezy for a while. I know these people. I'm more inside the culture now. But as a sort of outsider coming into it, a lot of indie makers, like it seems like they forget that it's business is competitive, and that, for instance, someone says like someone copies a GitHub repo to make
I hear
like a
what you're saying.
template, and then someone else copies the marketing for their template, and they're like, I never thought this would happen, and like someone would do me wrong like that. And it's like, that like people are out there with like restaurants and barbershops and shipping companies and logistics companies and oil companies and all this tourism companies, that's cutthroat. Like, your margin is my opportunity. Someone's always coming to take. You can't lower your prices. Someone will do it. And then you get these indie makers, and it's like, oh, that person's logo looks like mine. Like, I thought we had, and I think that's just like stupid. Like grow up. This is business, not some like community where everyone supports each other. I think that there's a place for building people up. And of course, in the startup industry in Silicon Valley, there's people helping people, founders making intros, investors helping founders, people going on podcasts and helping each other. But I think there's this little kernel where sometimes the indie makers forget this is business, not a cooperative communist commune or something. So that's an
I
observation I have about indie maker content.
I do agree with you, and to be honest, I've started to ignore some of it that you see on Twitter,
Yeah.
because the amount of people I interview on the pod, there is like a recipe for success. There is, here are the steps you need to take to do it, and there are often people that just don't do it.
Hmm.
They just ignore the advice, and they're they will get frustrated about something, and you'll be like, yes, but did you do these things that is like completely common knowledge? Did you validate your market? Did you go into a market that didn't have a ton of VC cash? Okay, is your product good? Did you listen to your users? And like, they're like, no. Did you do any marketing? No, I thought people would come. Yeah, and you do see a lot of that, and I'm like, I've not managed to figure it out myself, but I'm aware of that,
Hmm.
and I'm not moaning on Twitter about it.
Yeah.
But what do you think, Curtis, about having been someone that listened to this indie life throughout its lifetime
Hmm.
and hearing the updates sort of change into more life stuff and the dark side of entrepreneurship? What do you think about listening to that?
I think that I think the ratio's off, but it's good content. I think it actually is juicy when you hear someone say something about their personal life. This is maybe just like the dark side of entertainment. It is
Y-
juicy when someone is going into, here's how this affected my personal life. But I think the ratio's off, and I certainly want to hear what I see happen then. And this is kind of maybe a shot across the bow, is don't get too high on your own supply where you stop making businesses and then just become like a startup trauma content creator. So I will continue to listen to This Indie Life for a little bit, but if Dago has given up on trying to do businesses and has now just decided, I'm just going to make the trauma reflection the thing. I wanted 10% spice in the stew and 90% business stuff, not the other way around. So that's where it would lose me. But I can't deny that there's something juicy about listening to it when it happens. James, I gotta, I know that you've alluded to it a little bit, but I gotta jump on it because I feel like there's just a huge takeaway educational hook that I cannot move past, which is that you say, having interviewed many indie makers, there are repeatable steps to success that people don't follow. What would you say are those steps? Can you give us the wisdom on that? Or if there's 20 steps, sort of a summary of like the 4 or 5 themes that are important for success that you've observed.
Yeah, I've got more themes than steps
Yeah.
because the steps are completely different depending on the type of business
Yeah.
that you want to make.
Themes is
I
good.
would
Let's do
recommend
themes. Yeah.
I would recommend reading Arvid Kyle's The Bootstrap Founder book because he does outline the steps in which he took, and also Rob Walling's. Any of Rob Walling's content is way more advanced than what I could tell you from just the interviews that I've done. But like something that comes up all the time is SEO. I had Ahrefs as a sponsor on my podcast for the longest
Hmm.
time, and they were the perfect sponsor because every time someone would talk about their marketing and growth, they'd be like, yes, we implemented SEO, we started building landing pages, we focused on keywords, we researched them, we created a bunch of content. Saba from Veed was the first person that I saw really put this into motion.
Hmm.
And then there were a bunch of other products that have followed or like been in the London community, had chats with Saba, and Saba's gone like, need to get on your SEO.
Hmm.
Elson from Tiny Host, he's now at 20k MRR, got a fantastic one-person business, grown mainly through SEO, and it just happens time and time
So
again.
when someone
So
says, don't worry about SEO, you just need a landing page and then you need to run ads to validate whether it's a good product market fit for your
yeah,
offer. Is that a little too cute and they should, people should just start by, whether it's through new AI tools or through good old fashioned writing it like a human, they should get on an SEO strategy from day one?
get on your SEO strategy. I've not heard from someone that it has not worked if they have done it properly. I'm not against what you said,
Hmm.
but I have heard that work before.
Hmm.
Creating a landing page, getting traffic to it because it does speed up your validation process a little bit. If you've got a bunch of ideas but you haven't got many eyeballs, if you want to get the right kind of eyeballs on that idea to try and validate it,
Hmm.
try and figure out whether it's worth something pursuing, then maybe that's worth it. But if you do have an idea that is beginning to see traction, often that is because of the market and the need you are fulfilling and the amount of people that have that need,
Hmm.
then you will start to see a bit of momentum. I spoke to, this is recency bias, by the way. Whenever you speak to someone and have just edited a show, your examples will come to mind straight away. Spoke to Thibaut Louis Luca,
Hmm.
founder of Tweet Hunter. They grew it to 2 million ARR, sold it, built it to 9 million while at the acquirer. They did this a new project every couple of weeks. They did a bunch. I was like, how do you know which one to stop? He's like, you'll know. You'll know when it's the right one
Yeah.
because you just have that pull of the market. And other people that I've spoken to, similar thing. But also, he like really he's had a bunch of failure in the past and he really understands what doesn't work. And
Hmm.
this is another lesson.
Yeah.
Any person that has become successful has some level of failure, and they might have failed really hard, or they might have failed a little bit, or they failed over and over, and they're just getting the reps in. They're getting their business building reps in,
Hmm.
or maybe they've failed on a massive project within a company. They've seen where it's gone wrong, and they're like, right, I'm not going to do that again. It's those people that have learned from those lessons in failing. I think one of the best ways you can do is do something, fail, learn from your failings, move on to the next thing, or move on to another project within that thing. So many people, indie hackers, have failures. They if they learn from them, they come back stronger.
When I hear you talk about failures, I think two things. So one, I agree with you. Failures are great. Your success kind of is this tip of an iceberg on the top of a mountain of failures. But I also wonder sometimes if that becomes something that people latch onto like a cargo cult, and all of a sudden it's like, I failed and then I failed again and I'm still failing, but that's the journey. Should more indie makers realize at some point, with reflection on why the failures happened, I wonder if there needs to be more of a conversation around, this is going to be difficult to say. Difficult here. It'd be difficult for me to hear. It's difficult for a lot of people to hear. But maybe some indie makers would be much better as highly paid people with a job. That their failures mean that there's something that they like about building and coding and designing, but they're just not, the whole entrepreneurship part is maybe like not something they hate doing. Like if they literally hate marketing, introverted, hate sales, hate things that aren't coding, you could like many of indie makers probably have learned enough skills to make at least 150K a year. And is there some point where people should just be like, hey, do that, you're going to be fine, you can get a remote job, you can surf and have freedom and work async for an employer who's, good about that kind of thing. What do you think about that kind of way of looking at it?
For sure.
Yeah.
Like all indie hackers, all talented software engineers, sorry, often talented software engineers would be better financially with a job somewhere else,
Hmm.
at a company that will pay them American software engineer salary. However, we have this thing in our brains, which means we really want to start something of our own.
Yeah.
It's those people who have the like self awareness that they might not be good at marketing, and they need to find a balance to get something off the ground where they are working a little bit, maybe a contract job. They take the money from the contract job and they hire a marketer to help with them, or they partner up with someone. You got to be aware of that stuff. You got to be aware of the things that mean that you are failing. Because yes, people would be better off with a job, but that's not the game, dude.
Hmm.
Okay, it's people like some people just like want to build shit,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Why is it failing?" I'm like, "Ah, have have you seen what you're doing? Your product is shit." And if you can become aware of that, if you're spending however long with a couple of KMR
Hmm.
and you can't get it beyond that, just go and get a job. I've got a few examples of this with people that have like failed in terms of having a highly successful business, but are perfectly happy in what they're doing. My favorite example of this, Michael Christofides, PG Mustard. He's at like, I don't know, 1, 2 KMR, maybe less.
Hmm.
He's been running it for 5 years. He's super talented and he's got a co-founder. I'm like, dude, why is this not growing quicker? He's like, I'm kind of happy with where it is.
Hmm.
He works a few days a week consulting. He likes that. He's got like a really clear view that he's aware he's not putting in the time to skyrocket this company,
Hmm.
this indie project. He's happy with it being a project. He's also happy with working.
Hmm.
I myself, Curtis, have found that I have sort of failed to build an indie business in terms of like the productized service that I try to build for podcasting. I don't have a SaaS. I have a semi-successful podcast. There was a point where I thought the wallets might have worked out, but now I'm comfortable with the fact that I have a job which is producing a few podcasts for a few people, and the side projects, which is Indie Bites and Leather Wallets. I'm happy to just be side projects and just enjoy doing them,
Hmm.
keep them running. I, I'm happy with that. So I have a job now,
Yeah.
but it has a lot of flexibility, and
Yeah.
that's what I really like. I like the flexibility of not being told to be in a place from 9 to 5 these days. I just have my deadlines. Make sure these pods are published at this time.
It's almost like something in a rom-com Hollywood movie where a person thinks they want a certain kind of partner, and they're with the wrong partner, and I could never do this kind of partner, and then they go through, or some novel where they go through the very difficult journey of saying, hey, if I'm happy, that it might be successful, as opposed to, an identity thing where my identity is tied up in growing to 20K MRR from a thing that's not freelancing, that's a product, and now all these sort of,
And I
buckets.
think
Like,
most people have to figure it out themselves.
yeah.
Like I people could say to me, or I could say to you, you will not be happier when you hit your goal of 20k MRR. And they'll go, no, I want it. I will be happier. No, you won't. Like, there's been so many examples. Will your life maybe be a bit easier in like financially? Yes, but then will you have 100 other problems to do your SaaS, depending on how you build it? Probably,
Mhm.
maybe. It won't make you happy. Like, I've gone from struggling a few years ago and a grand a month, now over 10k a month. I'm generally happier, but that's not to do with the money helps,
Mhm.
but it's not just to do with that. It's like other things I've put in my life. I'm healthier, I'm fitter, I'm much gentler with myself in the work that I do, and I've managed to design my work schedule, which means I don't have to go too hard if I don't want to. I still have bad days. Like, I still have bad days, and a lot of people do, but mostly, mostly it's good at the moment.
Yeah, I've noticed two things. I've noticed a lot of things, but I noticed two main things contrasting the VC world and the indie maker world. So I'll just say two of them. One is my training, and this is sort of 7 to 10 years old. So take with a grain of salt everything I say because it was before the AI world where you might have an AI agent doing a bunch of stuff for you.
Yeah,
Handle it differently now in the 2020s. This was the 2010s. But in the 2010s, the training, if I can call it that, from advisors, board members, angel investors, and the stakeholders that you start to see as your kind of internal circle or network when you start the startup path, if I can use that word, the VC backed fundraising startup path was one, don't build. It was get customers. It was almost like sign customers to a product based on a pitch. And once you have enough validation, start building and fundraising around those customers after you've pitched them something and kind of grow that way. Whereas the indie maker um, ethos is like just build, share it, put it out there, but start coding, start designing tomorrow, so you can ship and show and build in public. So I actually think I loved learning this new religion after I was in a different religion,
yeah.
and I kind of was like, oh, there's a different church over here.
Sorry, dude. Sorry. When my first thought when you said I love learning this new religion, I thought you meant from VC to indie hacking.
Yeah, that's what I
I
meant.
was like, oh, is it?
Yeah, like
Oh, I didn't know whether you meant like an actual new
no, no,
religion,
no.
like you're going from Judaism to Christianity. I was like, and when I laughed, I was like, oh, maybe he does actually mean.
No, no, no,
So,
no. You
so you mean go from the VC
yeah.
religions to indie
they
hacking?
have they
Phew. All
have
right. Cool.
conflicting religious tenets and scriptures, right? And they
Yeah.
have different gods. In one side it's Sam Altman, on the other Peter Levels. Different gods, different Brahmins, different deities, different scriptures, and they're not all the same. They're in conflict. The other one that I notice is that in the VC world, there's a big emphasis on don't build something you just want, or don't just solve a problem for you and your friends. Go look at the agricultural industry, go look at aviation, go look at database software, go look at trucking companies, and find a market niche that isn't like you as like a market of one just building something you want for yourself. Those businesses, you might do okay, but we really, the VCs and the founders, I think, really look at it like the real successful businesses is when someone identifies an opportunity that isn't all wrapped up in their personal problems. It's kind of like they assessed a market, and then what happens though? Because there's some people listening saying like, "What about all these origin stories about I solved a problem?" Then what happens is VC-backed founders go and reverse engineer a heartwarming origin story that fits the market that they created it for.
Hmm.
So if you're like, I have nothing to do with the trucking industry, but I see an opportunity for logistics software. Then once you get your seed round and you're going on Forbes 30 under 30, you say, well, when I was growing up, my uncle had a trucking company. And all of those origin stories are kind of reverse engineered later and bullshit. Um, but indie makers seem to be like, I wanted something that makes, SQL queries easier to generate with AI. So I just made that. And they don't necessarily, not as many of them go through this exercise of, I'm going to go look at what markets are out there, which is like,
Yeah.
that is the training. That
Yeah.
is like, not the training, that's the wrong word, but that is the
Yeah,
ethos.
but that's what indie hackers should do.
Yeah.
Those that like have a problem for themselves and try and solve for that problem without doing much research on does anyone else have this problem.
Hmm.
Those that are successful are lucky.
Yeah. Hmm.
Because or maybe they should have. they have a problem for themselves, they're interested in building a product, and then they discover that thousands of other people want it and there is a market, so you can reverse engineer it.
Hmm.
So that should be the way, but isn't always.
Here's one that I think AI has totally blown up the playbook on this. I have no idea what the best practice should be. And it's around more people on the team. So of course, in the VC world, let's just say everything's changed now with AI. So I'm just saying in the past. In the 2010s, in the VC world, it was all about growing this team and getting dozens and then hundreds of people to believe in the vision for the team so that you can build something great. Indie makers tend to almost say, like, as part of one of the tenets of the scriptures of the religion, I do everything myself. And if I hire a freelancer, it's very, very carefully, and I almost don't want to. Um, what do you think about, or what have you seen when you interview people, and what have you heard about trying to be sort of designer, developer, marketer, salesperson, chief strategy officer, all by yourself versus, hey, should some of these people that are struggling just like get a team and they would not fail and grow faster because they actually have someone doing marketing every day instead of like, well, it's the third Sunday of the month, so I'll do marketing today.
Yeah, those guys that are successful solo are just supremely talented.
Hmm.
They're just really good at all the things. They're great designers, developers, marketers, and those that are good at one thing and struggle with the others, they're often great at software developing, not so good at marketing, then yes, you should get some help. You should find a co-founder. And some guys struggle, as you were saying, control freaks.
Hmm.
I'm the same. I've tried to hire people, but I really struggle with it.
Hmm.
And so I'm aware that I'm working on my own and I'm kind of happy to, but I can do that with the kind of stuff that I do. If I had a bigger business, then I would have to I would have to find help.
Hmm.
It's just you, you've got to you've got to know in yourself that you've got to relinquish some of that control or get really good at marketing
Yeah.
or get really or learn development. But it might take you quite a long time to get up to speed because if you're a marketer and you're like, I want to build a product, but I don't want to partner with or hire a marketer, then I'm going to have to learn software development. You're not going to get really good really quickly. It's going to take you a year, two, to be able to get up to speed and create something that uh, another indie hacker has been software developing for 10 years.
Hmm.
So, yes, hire help. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree, except that I think that in the next few years, there's going to be the concept of a supremely talented junior AI agent. And I
Yeah.
think that everything we know about, every once in a while, something comes along that genuinely changes organizational structure in like sort of the McKinsey theory of like, how should a company grow? Like in the late 1800s, it was there were factories and now we have an office. In the mid 20th century, it's like now we have the kind of post-war office with computers eventually, and then phones. There's lots of different trends and very few actually change things, but I think the concept that if you're in a meeting and there's an ever-present AI that can scrape the web, create spreadsheets, build designs, make pictures, write memos, and C3PO is there with you, or GPT-4, GPT-6 is there with you. I might look differently towards like, oh, you should hire people. I actually think what people should do is there is, and I don't know if you're listening on audio, I'm making like a square, but it's like designer, developer, marketer, salesperson is kind of the four quadrants of being a fully self-sufficient indie maker. I think
Yeah.
rolling out your AI workforce is another solopreneur activity that is the fifth. It's right in the middle now because it can do all the other four things. That's whether that's installing Olama, training the AI on what you want, realizing what tools are getting released, seemingly a new one every 2 weeks. And so I would, if I was like 19 and had no like preconceived notions of how to do things, I would explore getting deep on that, like run my own model, have it on my computer, get AI agents to do things before I tried to hire freelancers. I just think that's fascinating, and I think that they'll complement each other. But that's just sort of a curveball I'll throw in there, which is that I think the game has changed since I was
Yeah.
thinking about this 5 years ago.
I I'd actually not thought about that. And people who know me know I'm like a massive skeptic of new technologies.
Hmm.
I shouldn't be, but I am.
Do you feel that
And
way about AI, LLMs, and GPTs type things?
it's harder because with all the other trends that you've seen, cryptocurrency, NFTs, um, any trend that goes up, Clubhouse and that came out, I was like, no, 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 shit, shit, shit. But
Okay, but I got to There's NFTs and Clubhouse are nothing like
right,
AI is on a
no,
whole
but
nother level.
yeah, no,
Okay,
okay, so
yeah,
I agree, but the hype cycle was similar,
true.
where it was just like
Yeah.
everyone was on it, and like it stuck around. NFT stuck around for like quite a long time,
Hmm.
like 6, 7 months of people um making silly fucking characters and selling them for however like a rock for millions. And so like that similar thing came around with AI. It's like, yeah, but AI has been going for quite some time
Hmm.
with other tools. It was just ChatGPT made it an interface, Midjourney made it really clear on what you can go from zero to something. Now, so yeah, I was a skeptic in that
Hmm.
sense. And I'd never made an NFT. I use AI. I use AI on a day-to-day basis for
Yeah.
podcasting. It's
I think
amazing
that's the difference.
that
I hear what you're saying about the hype cycle, and
yeah.
I think I put NFTs as worthless and cryptocurrency as maybe. I would put AI as
Yeah.
definitely useful.
So
Definitely
so
useful.
so I'm saying like that is my default when
Hmm.
something new comes along and everyone gets really excited about it.
Hmm.
But you are right. You are 100% right with what AI does. I fucking hate talking about it because everyone talks about it. But Charlie Ward, founder of Ramen Club, he went viral because he created an app completely with ChatGPT. He's not a software developer. It was pretty impressive to see what he created, what can be achieved using this new technology. Very impressive. I think what you said about if you're 19 and young and instead of hiring someone, go really deep on learning how to use these technologies. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly.
Mhm.
So
And
I'm a
if you're
skeptic,
any age,
but
I said
yeah.
that like as if you're a beginner, but I
Yeah,
mean any
you are
age.
such an ageist.
Any age. If you're anyone should just learn how to use these things, and I've been trying to do it over the last year.
So what have you been going into in terms of learning it? Because I have not gone deep on this stuff. Should I be?
What basically, um, when you go to ChatGPT on a browser, just like a lot of things on the internet, that's kind of the non-techie version. It's for people
Yeah.
that don't code, and you go in and someone has made an interface that says this is the interface. And of course, like a lot of products, that's the one version of how to interact with something, but there's something called an API that is a different way to do it. And so, first, like step 1 is you can talk to the an API that has a lot of different flavors besides ChatGPT. And there's more companies than OpenAI. There's Anthropic and all these companies where you can go and get a chat that's good at code, specifically JSON and code, something that's good at something else, and you can kind of hook up to that and call the API for cheaper than your $20 a month ChatGPT subscription if you just know how to do that. I think I've done that. How do I not use the ChatGPT interface, but go and find like um, for instance, like a Python script. Imagine you just want to get 300 companies that are um, advertising agencies in England or Scotland. Let's just say advertising agencies in Scotland, and and if you go to ChatGPT and say, "Get me advertising agencies in Scotland," you might get a list of 4 things, right? But imagine you have a Google sheet that kind of you drag the formula down, and it's like fill this sheet. Here's the name. Each column is like email, phone number, address, and you're getting an AI to do something that's not just like give me a chatty little list of 4 things, but like act like a junior data analyst and finish this list. Once you finish this one, go browse the web again and get me the info for the next one. That's just one example, but it's the kind of thing of like spinning out your own tools and doing it and sort of learning how to do it in an hour. The next level, and I'll save this maybe for this could be a whole other podcast. I don't know how interesting it would be. The next level is this kind of idea that you don't need to use the commercial LLMs. You don't need to talk to OpenAI. You don't need to talk to Anthropic. You can go to Hugging Face or Olama, just grab one open source and run it on your M3 chip Mac. I haven't gotten deep into that, but I feel like that's digging at the next level where then the AI is free, except the compute that you use, which is the electricity, in your house. So that's kind of the next level. Um, and I wouldn't have done that like 5 years ago when I was like Silicon Valley VC. It's like
Yeah.
that's tech stuff. delegate that and go charge ahead. But I'm a little bit more of a tinkerer now, and so hopefully that wasn't
So
too long. But that's sort of the
no,
two
no. So
levels.
it's so you feel like there's opportunity here, and you've obviously gone
Mhm.
deep into learning about that and how the opportunity can be exploited, used.
I think it's
But
almost just like learning to use Excel instead of a typewriting pool of people. It's just like there's a new way to do things that's 10 times faster. I'm just learning how to do it, kind of thing. But sorry, go ahead.
and so have you applied this anywhere in your work or also in any projects you've built?
Yeah, almost all projects at some point have used AI to do something much faster. So it's little. I spend almost all or majority of my time with Lemon Squeezy, so I'm not like a full time indie hacker at all. But I do have like a side hustle blog where basically, one thing that ranks really well and helps support the blog is just articles about the top co-working spaces in a city, and some of the information collection and just getting that article made. It's not just dump it in AI, but it is something where the verification of the information and sort of like the opening hours and the, how many euro it costs for a day pass, the information is done by AI. It's sort of verified, scraped off of a page, routinely checked to see like, hey, this article's been out for 6 months. Is this information still true? No employee, no person in the Philippines, just AI checking that with a webhook. And that's just a little thing, but it would have been like this annoying, like, do I even want to do this blog if I have to go and check on update all these articles? This is just some side thing. But now it's like, oh yeah, my employee is doing that, but it's an AI.
This is for the remotely serious blog,
Yeah,
right?
for the remotely serious blog. Yeah.
And so these articles, are you writing these yourself or are you getting your AI to write them?
It's a
So like
combination of me, a human writer who's a freelancer, and
okay.
AI support for. So what I would say is they are not Ask GPT for the article. They are people that but whose most annoying grunt work is done for them by AIs, so that we can focus on just kind of getting it in there. And
Okay.
there's a lot that I'd love to do, but to kind of improve that and do things. But I'm not focused. I'm focused on the podcast right now, not on scaling up the blog. But the blog's there because it has certain SEO benefits at the moment that are easy to
Have
kind of maintain.
uh, podcast is content as well. Have you found anything that can help speed up your process?
Well, so far it's Riverside. I think that I probably started very. I'm new to the video stuff. I've been doing the audio for about a year. I know audio from doing stuff like with my band. I can like mix audio and create audio, but new to video, and so was doing things in Final Cut Pro. And then I realized, oh, you can just jump on Riverside. Um, I would say so far I haven't found. I have found things, not necessarily things I coded myself or made like tinkered with. I use Riverside. I use Descript. I use the tools of others, and they're certainly helping with shorts and transcripts. And I think it's still better to get someone to do it, but every 6 months you can see how like the process of making a podcast is gets easier and easier. So yeah.
Yeah, because there's some things I do fully manually myself
Hmm.
throughout podcasts, and there's some things where I'm actually quite reliant on AI tools. So Descript pretty heavily reliant on for cutting out ums, ahs, spaces. It's it's so unbelievably good for that. And I'm also really reliant on something called Orphonic, which is kind of similar to Adobe Enhanced, Descript Studio Sound.
Hmm.
It just strips out all the stuff, levels the audio, and sometimes when you've got bad audio, you just need to put it through something. And so I process all of my audio afterwards on Orphonic, and it saves some bad audio, and it also saves some decent audio that has like a bit of air conditioning noise in the background.
Hmm.
So I use that on a day to day. Where I don't use any um, technological support is in my preparation, where it could actually be quite useful. So when I'm researching
Hmm.
guests, I am manually doing that stuff, and I kind of there's like a little bit of
Yeah.
an art to it, right? Listening, like manually listening to a podcast
There's an art.
of a
In
guest, and
2025, I think it'll be trivial to say, hey agent, GPT-5, whatever, hey agent, make me a dossier that's really good, that's text, video, and links, and an audio that's a full complete dossier,
yeah,
and they'll do it for you, and it'll be 5 cents. So maybe not literally today, it'll be kind of be like, I would have done this a bit better, but I think give it a year and you will just put
Yeah.
the name in, get a dossier.
There is a tool that does this, guestlab.ai.
Guess lab. Yeah.
Sharath started it, and I've tried it. I think it was great. Sorry, like because I prefer doing it
Mm-hmm.
the way I do it. But you're right, and I'm pleased that there is someone in this space trying to make it work, because that in a year's time, as technology advances, is going to find exactly what I need from when researching a guest.
Well, James, I think there's a whole genre of content. This is remotely serious, and we talk about working remotely, not working in the office, working around the world. You said you've been to New York many times. I know that I've heard about other trips to the European continent and other places. We haven't gotten to that. Maybe some future episode we can jump back on and talk about that aspect, living and lifestyle and working remotely. But for now, I think this is an amazing first conversation. I've been listening to you and JR on Make Lemonade, so I feel like I know you, but now I really know you a little bit better, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Guys, this has been great. I want to speak for many, many more hours with you.
Well, that's great. Let's plan some future episodes, and this is going to be a fun one. This is really fun. I think obviously it's always a treat to have another podcaster on, because you can get into the flow, and you're a more experienced and better podcaster than me. So this was
Oh, I don't think
this
so.
was an
I don't
honor.
think so. Pleasure to be on, mate.
All right, thanks everybody. This was Remotely Serious. We're on video now, so do your thing, like and subscribe wherever you're listening, and we'll see you next week.